Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app.
Optimo Pathfinder is the next generation of financial modelling. Designed specifically for Australian financial advisors, Pathfinder allows you to develop and compare multiple financial strategies within minutes. With cutting-edge optimisation and built-in legislation, it removes the burden of time-consuming modelling and report creation. Easy to use and easy to understand. It saves hours of manual work and allows you to turn around financial strategies in a fraction of the time. Take your business to the next level with Optimo Pathfinder.
Hello and welcome to this topic series on delivering advice differently. My name is Fraser Jack, and in this podcast, episode number 2 of 5, we cover separating a strategy from product, from a sales-based industry to professional advice as a product, and how the stakeholders, or all of the stakeholders, from the regulators to advisors and clients, are benefiting from this approach. Sitting back and appreciating how far we've come was really rewarding and worth highlighting. So put your feet up and enjoy this episode. Thanks for joining me again, Ben.
Thanks, Fraser. Feels like forever since we last spoke.
There you go. It was a whole episode ago. Now we in this particular episode we're talking about separating strategy from product, and I guess that really starts with the concept of creating an advice process that is consumer led.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of discussion going on at the moment about the outcomes of financial advice rather than the inputs into financial advice. And so when you look at the advice process and what you're trying to do with the client, you're trying to help them understand their goals and objectives. You're trying to help them understand their financial position. You're trying to help them understand how they can put strategies in place to meet their goals and objectives and improve their financial position and get the right kind of outcomes for their life. When you talk to members, when you talk to financial planners, what they'll consistently say is 90% of what they do is helping clients go through that process, how they define their goals, how they define their objectives, how they trade off between them, how they create strategies to help them achieve them. The very last 10%, and often it's less than that, is which actual products do we use to implement those strategies so that the clients can achieve their goals and objectives. And so from that perspective, there's a real separation of the financial planning service that the financial planner is providing. There is a real separation of the strategies that help the client achieve their goals and objectives, and a real separation of the products that are used ultimately as just a tool, a mechanism for implementing those strategies.
Yeah, it certainly feels like the ship sort of turned over time from being, product sales to, as you mentioned in the previous episode, getting into the advice as a product, but it's sort of, it's turned to that strategy and understanding and all those other things around the process of discovery and relationship and everything around that. But, obviously with the outcomes based that you mentioned earlier, that's really around the idea that none of this actually happens if clients don't engage and be part of this and then put these strategies and therefore some products in place to make this actually happen.
Yeah, that's right. And we were talking about the tension between the services that a professional financial planner provides to their clients and the laws and regulations that licensees kind of have to force us into complying with from their side of things, and the tension that creates. It's a tension that FPA members have been trying to deal with and straddle for many, many years. And I think you saw a lot of them set up their own licensees or move to licensees who had a much bigger focus on the client, a much bigger focus on things like goals-based advice and outcomes-based advice services rather than selling financial products. And that was a natural place for professional financial planners who believed in this. The client is the center of what I'm doing, not the products I'm selling, naturally gravitated towards.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense to me if I put my hat on to think of maybe how the regulators would think about that too, that if you're putting the client first, you're in a lot better position to be, doing what's right for the regulators if you're starting with the client rather than starting with the product. But what I wanted to get into is with strategy. A lot of the time, strategy then requires education and explanation, and that's the part of the and you mentioned the advice process in the future will look very different. But that's the sort of part that we really want to try and capture as part of the advice process, or capture as the product that is financial advice, that explanation of how things work, that explanation of the strategy, and we'll get to understanding a bit later in the series, but that them coming along for the journey and being able to say, no, I get that, I understand that, or I've learnt that, or I've increased my knowledge around that strategy. So now I'm happy to proceed with it.
Yeah, and I think the challenge for most planners is that's what they do with the client and in front of the client, and they co-create their advice, they co-create the education, they co-create the strategy recommendations with the client, and they'll spend a lot of time doing that and spend a lot of time making sure the client understands. But traditionally, we haven't really recorded that part of the process. We might record file notes and we say we educated the client and the client understood, but we don't go into a lot of the detail. And we generally don't provide that to the client as part of the toolkit of information that we give to the client at the other end. We might leave them with fact sheets, or we might send them web links about salary sacrifice, or about how superannuation works, or about how life insurance works. But what we don't usually provide is a recording of that education process. And I think that's a missed opportunity, and something that financial planners should definitely start thinking about. And, this is where the concept of recording meetings starts to take on a whole different level, be it recording the audio, but probably more recording video, whether it's live in person or using Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever technology you're using, to virtually meet with your clients, recording those, and then providing a copy of that to the client. You don't need file notes if you're doing that. You may not need a statement of advice, a separate statement of advice if you are doing that.
Yeah, separate document. Now, it's fair to say that most people, or I reckon 100% of people who are listening to this podcast would understand how to perform online meetings or online video and have a webcam attached and a microphone or some description set up to their system.
It has become the norm during COVID.
Yeah, I really like the way you sort of mentioned with regards to that one-way recording in an SOA, that the SOA has traditionally just been, here is what I recommend you do. Here is the strategy, then here is how it works. And it's kind of like a one-way broadcast as opposed to the two-way conversation. I'm not saying that planners don't have the two-way conversation. I'm just saying that the actual advice process and documentation has all been set up about a one-way broadcast versus a two-way capturing of the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. And again, it's outcome of the way that we document the statement of advice is on paper, and therefore you can't reflect that live engaging conversation in that document. And so a couple of years ago, the FPA released the Future of the SOA report, and we started to encourage our members to deliver advice digitally, where you can start to put these components. You can, if you record the meeting because you are doing virtual meetings, or even if you're sitting in the office and you record with the client, you can actually put that into the financial plan that you provide to the client. And if clients can look back at the conversation they had, they go, oh yeah, I remember having that conversation. Whereas if they read it on a page, they don't necessarily have that same recall.
And, obviously you mentioned technology being a great lead into that. And I want to sort of mention that when there's sort of 2 to 3 reasons why most of us should be embracing technology. Obviously, the top 2 efficiencies and effectiveness of the process are the ones, and then there's the third one that you and I subscribe to, which is just we like geeking out about it and makes us feel good inside to be playing with new technology. But if we focus on the efficiencies and effectiveness piece, obviously we're looking at using technology in a way that's efficient and effective within the process. I just want to also cover off on the concept of what you're talking about with recording meetings. Does that require a huge amount of technology products that we don't already have?
Generally, no. I mean, most of us are set up with a camera on our laptops or a camera with our computer, or we buy a cheap Logitech or whatever brand camera that we attach to our computer. Most of us have headphones or earphones that have microphones attached to them, or you can buy a separate microphone if you need something better. And so effectively we've got the technology that we're using anyway to record the meetings that we're having with our clients. All you need to do is ask their permission to record it and then find a secure way to provide that back to them, so they've got a copy of it if they want to go back and have a listen or have a look at what was being discussed. So it's fairly simple, and I think we're all, again, getting back to the COVID issue, we're all kind of used to doing it because we've been operating this way for large parts of the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, fantastic. So anything that can produce an online meeting, the ability to share screens, the ability to record, and the ability to save the file and send it through to the client. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ben, for being part of this particular episode. We were sort of talking about strategy and the versus product, but I look forward to chatting to you in the next episode where we get stuck into visuals and finding ways to engage the client.
Thank you, Fraser. It's good to be here today.
Welcome to this episode 2 in our 5-part series. And in this particular episode, we're talking about strategy and product and specifically separating the two and making them completely different parts of the process, essentially for the client's purpose. Welcome back, Prashant and Michelle. Prashant, tell us about your advice process and how you separate strategy from product conversations.
So in terms of our process, because we have a 100% online service delivery, we start off with a sort of a trial phase. This is where your prospect at that stage engages with you 3 times in short burst meetings over a 21-day period, or once every week. And in that journey, you're discovering their personal, their financial, and then you're sort of proposing a solution of how you're going to tackle this. And quite often we have our belief is that we can't tackle a person's financial solution in one go. We usually say we're going to do this, but we're going to do this over a 6 to 12 months period. So we sort of stretch it. So we're sort of making sure we're solving one thing at a time, So once they become a paid member, as we call them, once they become a paid client, then the first thing we start doing is the co-creation of the strategy. So in that first month, we start with purely discussing the financial modeling elements. Product's not even in that picture, nothing. It's just more, you walked in, you said you want these 10 things. I found 3 different ways, or our teams found 3 different ways to do this. One's financially awesome, but it'll come at the back of a lot of sacrifices. And one's not that financially awesome, but but it'll still work. So us being able to come up with the 3 routes, the fastest, quickest, and the easiest, kind of routes, and then presenting that to them is the first part of the journey. We usually find that it's one iteration, everyone's really clear with what they're after, and they pick the non-financially savvy route. They actually usually pick the middle or the more happier journey kind of thing. Occasionally it goes to a second iteration, but we're happy to spend more time in this part because this creates the architecture of what we're about to do. So we'd rather get the architecture right before we start building anything. So that's the first part of the journey. And then as we go in the subsequent months, we start sorting out each part of the advice and the products and everything that fits that architecture. So if it's a super, if we're going to solve that problem, it's super is sort of like one room in this architecture. So we're going to make sure it fits that exactly to what the client wanted,
Yeah, fantastic. So it's, as you mentioned, short burst, or as what some people would call scaled advice, because you're scaling it down into sections. And I really love the concept of 6 to 12 month plan, of putting things in place, and of obviously having paid members and people that are on a, let's say, retainer. Is a retainer model the best way of doing that?
A subscription model, yeah.
Yes.
So that's how we're doing it.
And what I really like about Prashant's approach there is just the integrity in the process. Like, you're starting with the getting to know the client, their values, their needs, their goals. Then you're moving into the strategy, and then product comes after that. And I think that's really, it's like a skeleton. You get the skeleton right, and then everything else hangs off that.
Yeah. Now, obviously, in this process, if I'm looking at that from the outside in, I'm thinking there's got to be some sort of prioritization process. As in, if you're going to do scaled bit by bit, piecemeal advice, you've got to then say to the client, we would prioritize this one. How, do you give them an opportunity to prioritize as well?
Yep, definitely. So, there's always going to be, for example, if they walk in with 10 things I want, and there's always going to be nice to have and must haves, and it's about, trying to take away from the bottom up rather than top down. And then again, giving them the choice, we ideally, every time we try to model it, we try to model everything, and everyone wants their cake and want to eat it too. So, and it's quite normal, but again, giving them that visual, and especially this blueprint or this modeling stage, we call it the blueprint stage. This stage is where we give them the choice to take things out. We've prioritized it. They know what their priority is, but when they visually see it, and they make those choices as a couple or as an individual, they're buying into that commitment. There's a behavioral element to advice, which, we tend to miss. But when they commit to saying, that's okay, I'll wait on that, I think the chance of a successful outcome for them is much higher.
Yeah, buying into the strategy is obviously a huge piece of this. And you mentioned you give them 3 options, which is great. Now, Michelle, this is obviously 101, business 101, right? You give people 3 options, and they will choose the middle one. But what are your thoughts on with regards to this concept of being able to give 3 options, and but then also allowing them to take those options and unpack them?
I think that's really important. I mean, the competing priorities and goals is a difficult thing to work through. And, it's like the concept of the jar with you put your big rocks in first and you work out the things that are most important and then fill it with the smaller and smaller things. And, I think being able to give people a number of options and work through those, I think is really an important approach.
Yeah, Michelle, the strategy essentially is the framework that everything works upon after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it is working out, how much can you squeeze out of that to, how many rocks can you fit in the jar. Once you can really optimize strategy well, you can fit more rocks in the jar for your client.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously strategy is the part that clients need to understand in today's world. We need to make sure they've got informed consent being the words. But tell us about how Prashant, you work through the strategy with a client, and then allow them to, as you said before, co-create the end strategy. Yeah.
So when we sort of do the modeling, it comes down to the tool that we use and the advisor's familiarity and comfort around doing this. So the tool we use, we don't shy away from showing it to a client. We just share screen. We say this is what what have we come down to, and these are the 3 options. Now we spend probably 15 to 20 minutes explaining these things, and then we say, what would you like to take off? What would you like to change? So, and then when they say, actually, what, let's not do that, or how about, instead of putting $1,000 a month into this investment, how about cutting it back to 500? And instead of saying, oh, okay, I'll go back and come back to you tomorrow, we're able, we tend to do it straight away. We sort of take that mystique of, we're trying to make it simple. It's almost like, sometimes it's like, oh, if it's so simple, why am I paying you so much? But we try to take that away. Say, no, this is simple. Take it away. We give them the answer straight away, and then they go, okay. And it's sort of like build a bear kind of thing, at that point. And that's usually the second half of the meeting. They keep trying back and forth, and they all then come to terms that, great, this actually, is exciting. Let's do that. That's how we do it.
So Prashant, how do you find that customers respond in that process?
The blueprint stage, the modeling stage, is probably the peak in our customer experience journey. It's that we start. It's almost like we start with a high note, and it's hard for us to finish in that high, after the 12-month period. But now we've sort of find a way to finish that 12-month period in that high note. But we're finding that the highest amount of client engagement, because we take feedbacks in a regular frequency, and the excitement they bring, it's so hard to find it in any other pieces of the journey. For us, it's interesting what we find.
That's really cool.
I want to try and throw to the concept that some advisors would have a fear of modeling a software with their client, just through some of the complexities, obviously, around maybe the tools that they're using. But what are your thoughts on leaning into actually learning the software and being able to use it with the client?
For us, it's very important. So both Daniel and I invested not a lot of time, but a reasonable amount of time understanding the tool. And of course, the easier it is, the better, whoever builds it. But it's almost like, if you want to be a gynecologist and you don't know how to operate an ultrasound, you see what I mean? You've got to invest time on the tools of your trade. Yes, there's all these other people behind the scene to make it better or can do it for you. But I think that this part was too critical for us not to sort of get our hands on. Sure, we have paraplanning and all the others that fine tune it and sort of deliver a better, more smoothened outcome post meeting. But this part was very important. And I think technology is like any relationship. The more time you spend, the better it gets.
Yeah, and Michelle, obviously having a tool that's easy to use cuts down on the amount of staff and obviously increases the efficiency in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think you've touched on a really good point. It can be quite scary for advisors where, they want to engage their clients in that process, but it's a bit scary putting yourself on the spot and making it live. How we've seen advisors have typically done that is they start familiarizing themselves with the software, and then they'll run a couple of scenarios. So they might start with a base case, do nothing, get no advice. This is what your net worth would be at the end. Then they model a couple of scenarios, and those things that they've worked through and they feel confident in, then they might anticipate a couple of what if questions the customer would have. And then in the meeting, if they've already got a basis that they've prepared, they know really well, and then that's kind of the icing on the cake. So
you're right, Michelle. If you have a couple of scenarios where you think somebody might, in this situation, might be thinking this, and therefore we're gonna answer that prior to, you can actually introduce the conversation. If they don't bring it up, you can say some people often think this, and so we go into that and we show them how that works, and it gives them more of an understanding that, or it certainly appears that you know your way around the software a little bit better than you may have the confidence in.
And can anticipate their needs. They've raised something in a previous meeting that was a question or an idea. So yeah, attentive to their needs.
Yeah. And I also find that as advisors, we tend to underestimate our ability to learn technology. I think when I compare with a lot of other professions, we've adopted this much better than so many other professions. And I think we're doing a great job at this. I think we'll adapt very quickly in learning these things.
Yeah, now, Prashant, you sort of mentioned the ongoing conversation, because it's not just about providing the advice up front. It's, your model lends itself to, having shorter meetings but more regularly with your members, and obviously tracking towards their outcomes and changing the scenarios all the time, because, people have moved from where they were 3 months ago to, where they are now. Tell us about how, you use software in that space to be able to help your clients, track towards where they're going, but also recognize how well they've done in the past.
Sure. So in terms of the progress, what we find is we usually start with 5 key dimensions to start measuring the member at the start of the journey. So, like in terms of how they're tracking on an income perspective, debt perspective, savings, we just have 5 measurable, quantifiable, metrics. We show them where they are. And then at the end of the 12 months, we show them where, how the dials have changed. That's pretty much a before and after. You started at red, now you're at green, that sort of thing. But where the strategy and everything that we do between the 12 months is it starts giving us a clear indication of how the dial will start turning. So, for example, by saving this much, when we do the modeling, we know how to ration the assets. We know how to ration the cash flow to get to that, shifting the dial. So we always take a before and after at different points. And internally, we do that at least 3 times a year internally, but the client only sees it twice a year, start and the end.
Yeah, there's certainly a saying, I think you would, Michelle, you'll attest to this, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. How important is measuring these types of things in the advice process?
Oh, super important. The background to process improvement, particularly if you look at Lean Six Sigma, first you take a baseline and measure, where are you now? Then you make your changes and you come back and measure it again. It's absolutely that. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Yep. Now, Prashant, I wanted to quickly ask you around, we talked about previous, occupations and professions, and certainly doctors are a great one to model an advice process off. The concept of, the doctors, you go in, you give them all the information, they do tests, they run diagnostics, they then create look at treatment plans, which we could formally talk about as strategies before they talk about medication or product. How do you have that conversation around what you're doing and how it relates to a sort of a medical process?
Absolutely. So so we interestingly about 2 years ago we had this opportunity to sit with a couple of doctors, and because to me, they have so much more variables to deal with when they look at a patient. There's 100 million things that could be wrong with this person. How they quickly arrive at the problem point and how they sort of solve it was amazing. And I kept probing them in terms of how they do it and things like that. And it just comes down to, it's basically they try to boil it down to what they think is wrong, that usually comes with a little bit of experience. But then they order tests to validate it. So it's not like the tests are not there to find what's wrong with you. The tests are there to validate what they think is wrong with you, and it's usually the opposite of what we think the tests are for. But then after that, they go with, once it's validated, then they look at a potential treatment plan, which is customized to your body, I guess, So, and I think the way we called this process, that first process where they test you to find a validate, it's called differential diagnosis. That's how they call it. There's 3, and we usually do that. When we finish that onboarding journey, we decide on what's potentially wrong with them or what's potentially stopping them from achieving this goal. And we incorporate that into the modeling, to sort of say, if we change this one behavior, how does everything change into the future? And showing the client the future self, their future self is very powerful. And just pointing and boiling it down to that 1 or 2 behaviors that could change it from doing nothing versus becoming, having a couple of $1 million to show for and a happy life, it's priceless. Yeah. So that's how we've incorporated that into the process.
I just love the way that you use the word, kept probing the doctors. It was until they gave you the information you needed. But it's a really good point, isn't it? Because sometimes it's behaviours that make a difference to the treatment plan. Their current behaviours, not necessarily financial products. And I think that when we're talking or focusing on strategies and modelling with strategies and allowing people to understand the consequences of their actions, it puts the onus on sometimes their actions more so than just the products. Michelle?
And I think it's really important that in this process that they understand the strategies, because you could walk away with the best diagnosis and prescription, but if they don't take the pills and they don't trust your advice, then it's kind of all a waste of time. So it's really that engagement process, the building trust, the confidence, the educating them in the process that they'll walk away and take on board your advice.
Yeah, I think that's very much like your standard coaching 101, isn't it? Allow the client to be able to, come to the conclusion, take ownership and want to make the changes rather than just sort of telling them what they they need to do, and letting them understand that, these are the consequences of their actions, and they have the opportunity or the choice to change that. Prashant, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us in this episode, number 2 of our 5-part series. We look forward to catching you in the 3rd episode. Jeff, thanks for joining us again in the 2nd episode.
My pleasure. Always good to be on your show, Fraser.
Now we're talking about strategy and product, and certainly the difference between strategy and product, and making sure that we keep those two things separate in this profession that we're in. Tell us a little bit about your process and what you do around, with your conversations with clients when it comes to strategy versus and then product.
So I've got several distinct phases. So I have an estate planning process. So that's more or less, I use the software that I use to help outline a client's current situation. But then I would sort of describe the outcomes for them and the key things they need to consider. So I guess that one is a little bit easier because I've been doing that for a long time, and it does come quite automatic, where I can size up a situation quite quickly, no matter the scale, and have ebooks and other things which I use as part of that process. Now, other strategy. So I do use a tool where probably an important tool that I use is I like to help the clients understand their goals. I don't like the situation where you assume the client knows what their goals are, because who knows how much you need for retirement. That has got to be a very unique requirement. And yet the whole industry is about you need X dollars for retirement. So I'm very big on helping the client to understand what their goals are and what life looks like for a retirement, even if they're not even retiring. So, and then it's a matter of working backwards and then filling in the dots for them. And so that could take on many different roads. And then the financial advice is all different depending on what their outcomes are and where they see themselves. So I find that I would spend 2 or 3 meetings on that side of it, rather than sitting there in front of them and filling out a form and writing down what their goals are. Does that make sense, Fraser?
Yeah, so you're co-creating those goals with the client, as in you don't say, what's your goal? You say, if for this to happen, do you want it to be here, here, or here? Or are you getting deeper into that sort of conversation? What does breakfast look like in retirement? Or like how deep do you go?
How deep? So really, I sort of like it another way. I give them the platform for them to fill in to create their own life, to fill in the chapters of their life. I don't tell them what it should look like. I just give them the platform, and then then I provide them with the tools to help make it happen. So quite often they don't know what is possible. And so it's about exploring the possibilities and getting them to lift their vision, or to look much broader, so rather than very narrow. And a big part of my job is to help them avoid pitfalls and making poor choices about the current situation and what they should be aware of in the future.
Yeah, and so with those pitfalls, you're obviously pointing those out because often people wouldn't see them coming.
Oh, no, very rarely, yeah. So it could be, well, the obvious one is not having an estate plan. Is the pitfall there is they get sick, or they might die, or something tragic, and there's no plan. It's just total disarray, and their life for their family is impacted forever. Or worse, could be fighting, disharmony, all sorts of issues on that estate planning side.
Yep. Excellent. So, and then by the time you've done that and you really know them very well, and you start talking about, get rid of the pitfalls, sort them out. Let's make sure the contingencies are in place. Then look at what the possibilities could be, and then, as you said before, broadening the horizon on what's possible.
That's right. Yeah. So I'd like to plan to 100 and then work back. So, and that helps. So it gives the clients a bit better time frame to work in. So the 65 may become a 75. And that gives us an opportunity as to what can you do right now to improve your life, or to help you do what you really want to do in life, not just follow some track which has been laid out for you by someone else.
Right, and then so you're able to then look at some modelling around that, and then discuss different strategies with the client that can assist.
Exactly, and that could be even what they're doing for a living, a succession plan for their business, a whole range of different things which you might not otherwise have discussed.
Yeah, there's if
where they're going to live, for example, could be something like that.
Yeah, if you remove product from the conversation altogether when we talk about strategies, a lot of those strategies could be habits or decisions that can be made within and around the family or the relationship or all sorts of things. How where they want to set their goals and their sights. All of these things are strategies, I guess.
Yes, for sure, and also how they use their money. So it's not just about slogging it away for 20 years to have a retirement which someone else says you should be having. It's about using that money now to enjoy life and to prepare themselves for a long future.
Yep, fantastic. And as you said before, you said a couple of meetings. What would your average meeting process be with a new client?
Yeah, so I initially have the initial meeting is quite broad. And it's really understanding how the client came to be in the position today, what's influenced them over their life journey. So that, and sort of, try and identify a few gaps. I cover 5 different areas. So that's an initial 45-minute meeting. And then once they're engaged after that, and then we probably have another 4 or 5 meetings. And because you have to remember there's 2 estate planning meetings in there, so that they're actually proper meetings. So not, I'll send you down the road to the local solicitor type estate planning. So that helped. That's why there is so many meetings involved.
Yeah, it's certainly more and more talking to people, the more and more they're spending more time in this initial process with new clients, obviously bringing them on, and part of that upfront, which we're not covering today, but is around setting the expectations of that up front and letting them know that it's going to be a long process. Does that mean that you are able to sort of look after fewer clients or take on fewer new clients?
Physically, it's not possible to have lots and lots of clients when you follow that type of process, because it's fairly hands-on, and it's building up quite a deep and meaningful relationship with the clients.
Yep, fair enough. You are looking after a lot of things, therefore a lot of things to get in place at the beginning, but also a lot of things to come review time. Jeff, thanks so much for catching up in this particular episode 2. We look forward to catching you in the next episode where we start talking about using visuals for engagement.
My pleasure. Thank you, Fraser.